Let's pray. Lord, thanks for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I don't know if, I have a lot of stuff in my head every week. I can't remember if I've used this title before, but I do interviews. Have I used it? Okay. I have used it? Okay, well, then this will be part two. Part two is implied. Wars, rumors of wars, and wars of rumors. And I apologize. I do a lot of interviews and talks with other people, and sometimes I forget what I've done. And it's always funny because somebody will write to me and say, you need to talk about this. And I'm ready to say, I just talked about that last Sunday. Were you not paying attention? But I never write and say that until I go check to see if I actually did say it last Sunday, because even I don't remember what I talked about. So it's not fair to you. But does anybody think that the world is just a bit chaotic at the moment? Everybody's fighting with everybody. So we're going to try to go through some of the stuff in the Middle East. There are big meetings with Trump and Netanyahu this week, and that happened like Monday. So that's like ancient history at this Monday and Tuesday. That's like ancient history at this point. And I don't know that anything was accomplished. So we'll talk about Middle East, and I have some AI stuff that I may or may not get to. There is going to be a technology roundtable on August 13th, a Wednesday evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. With the usual guys, Patrick Woods, Rich Gillette, Scott Townsend, maybe Pete Garcia, maybe Tom Hughes. Not sure who all's available yet, but we'll be talking about a lot of things because there's a lot of things that happen in the AI technocracy, technology, transhumanism space. I mean, it's really... It's like any one of these topics I could do several hours on very easily just to summarize some of the things that are going on. So again, the verse that we use a lot to reference, because I think it's indicative of the type of era that we're in. We're in Daniel chapter 12. Daniel wants to know, when is this stuff going to happen? With all this stuff I've seen, when is it going to happen? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And in Daniel 11, around 32, 33, 34, 35, it says that the wise will instruct many. And I did a teaching many years ago on that called the Masculine, the wise who understand. And I think we're at that point in time, and we just want to pray that we're part of the wise people, the wise guys, if you will, that we can understand a little bit about what's going on, because it is very, very difficult to keep up. So, let's see. I haven't talked about this as a tragedy. Pray for the families in Texas that have gone through this. A lot of theories out there about how this happened. It is an area that's prone to flash floods. These cabins were built in flash flood areas, and I believe people were told. The New York Times has a very good analysis of this today. So it's a huge tragedy. These things happen. Let's see. Okay, so let's go here to the first thing I want to talk about. And I'm going to go in here to about 11 minutes. This is a meeting. So Netanyahu comes to Washington, and it's a pretty big deal. It's his third trip to see Trump since Trump came into office back in January. He's the only world leader that's done that. He was the first world leader to visit. And this is where the wars of rumors come in, because there is a continual effort by people to change the narrative, to control the narrative. So you've heard all these statements. Trump and Netanyahu aren't getting along. They're at odds with each other. Trump is upset with Netanyahu. And I'm just saying, if you watch the meeting, and you'll get to see a little bit of it here, Netanyahu comes. Now, one of the things they didn't do this time was they didn't have a big joint press gathering. In fact, none of that was planned, but they did sort of an impromptu one. So you can see the table. They had dinner. You see Marco Rubio, President Trump, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. I think that's CIA Director Radcliffe and Mike Huckabee, the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, and then Monica Crowley's in the back. And across from them is Prime Minister Netanyahu and his entourage. And so they had a little discussion at dinner, and I believe, well, let's see if I got this teed up in the right spot.
Thank you very much. 7,000 last week souls. And if I can stop that, you know, they have parents and they have sisters and brothers and getting married, and who knows, they're just people, but they're souls. And if I can stop a war, you know, because they have an ability to do so, I'm disappointed, frankly, that President Putin hasn't stopped. I'm not happy about it either.
Mr. President, on the Iran talks, can you say if you scheduled the next round of Iran talks, and then also on strike?
We have scheduled Iran talks, and they want to talk. They took a big drubbing. I think when we hit the three sites, really, I would say the three sites, not just the one. The one was a big one, and it was deep in granite, and it was obliterated. It turned out the Atomic Energy Commission said it is obliterated. I would just want to take our hats off to those incredible flyers, the people that flew that big machine, and frankly, the mechanics and everybody else. They had zero. They flew for 37 hours with zero problem mechanically. I mean, when you think and carrying the biggest bombs ever, the biggest bombs that we've ever dropped on anybody, when you think non-nuclear, and we want to keep it non-nuclear, by the way. But they did a phenomenal job. It was an amazing job, and I think that was, I was talking to Bibi about it before, that was the very beginning of the end. It ended very quickly after that. I don't want to say what it reminded me of, but if you go back a long time ago, it reminded people of a certain other event, and his Harry Truman's picture is now in the lobby, in a nice location in the lobby where it should have been, but that stopped a lot of fighting. And this stopped a lot of fighting. When that happened, it was a whole different ballgame.
On future Iran strikes, what can you say, what might make you have a desire to do another strike on Iran?
Another what?
Another strike on Iran.
I hope we're not going to have to do that. I can't imagine wanting to do that. I can't imagine them wanting to do it. They want to meet. They want to meet. They want to work something out. No, they're very different now than they were 2 weeks ago.
Is there a date yet for the Iran talks, or a city? Do you know when and where the next round of Iran talks will be?
Well, I can tell you, I'd rather not say, but you'll be reading about it tomorrow or seeing it tomorrow.
Mr. President, what is the holdup currently in this ceasefire with Hamas?
In which?
Ceasefire
between Israel and Hamas. What's currently the holdup?
I don't think there is a holdup. I don't think there's a holdup. I think things are going along very well. They just, left each other, and it was not a pleasant period of a few days. It was a little longer than a few days, but this was not a pleasant period of time. And we were at the end. 14 missiles were shot, and every single missile was shot out of the air. It was pretty amazing. That was sort of the end. And they told us they were coming, and where they were, and what time they were coming. And they said, if you'd like to have a different time, we'll do that. And that's respect when they do that. I appreciated that they did that. There was no surprise. We got the soldiers out of the base in Qatar, in this case. But they knew they were coming. 14 missiles were coming. 1 o'clock, they said, would you like to make it later? They said, no, let them come at 1 o'clock. And at 1 o'clock, everybody was, as you know, over 5,000 people left the base. And we had 3 gunners and 3 assistants. And out of the 14 that were shot, all 14 were knocked down. And that was the end. That was about it. And we had We had a rough time, but sometimes you need the rough time in order to get. I think things are going to be really settled down a lot in the Middle East, and they respect us, and they respect Israel. They respect a lot of things that took place. Nobody's ever seen equipment like what we sent over to knock out those sites. But when those sites were knocked out, it essentially that was the end.
Do you think that there can be a two-state solution?
Ask a question about the
I don't know. I asked Bibi that question. You have the greatest man in the world to answer that age-old question, two-state. Go ahead. You give him your honest answer.
I think the Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten us. And that means that certain powers, like overall security, will always remain in our hands. Now, that is a fact. And no one in Israel will agree to anything else because we don't commit suicide. We want life, we cherish life for ourselves, for our neighbors. And I think we can work out a peace between us and the entire Middle East with President Trump's leadership. And by working together, I think we can establish a very, very broad peace that will include all our neighbors.
Mr. President, a question on Iran. You asserted that there's complete and total destruction of their nuclear facilities. So what is the basis of the talks going forward? Is it to cap future nuclear activity? Is it ballistic missiles, terror support, economic-based opportunities?
It's really a good question because if you remember when it was done, I sort of said, what's the purpose of talking? It's been knocked out completely. But they've requested a meeting, and I'm going to go to a meeting, and if we can put something down on paper, that will be fine. That'll be good. I think they've gained a lot of respect for us. I think they've gained a lot.
Well, anyway, that dinner started with Prime Minister Netanyahu presenting President Trump with a letter that he was sending to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm not sure if that's an award, given the fact that people like Yasser Arafat have been awarded that in the past. But nevertheless, it's a big deal to people, and of course everybody then said, oh, this is the way you do diplomacy in the Trump era, is you flatter him, and then you get what you want. But it's clear they had a very long meeting. They had meetings the next day, and then they even had some additional meetings. Prime Minister Netanyahu went to the Pentagon, spent time with Secretary of Defense Hegseth. They flew him around on a special plane to get from place to place. So this was it was a big deal, and it lasted much longer than anybody thought. The one thing, though, that I think everybody's been a little bit tight-lipped about is there's not a lot of indication exactly what happened or what was accomplished. And part of that is because of the nature of the enemy that you're dealing with and the people you're negotiating with, because you never reach a negotiation with the Iranians. It's their method of getting a deal is to delay. That gets them the ability to do what they want. And that's what they had. So Prime Minister Netanyahu then showed up on a number of places. I don't have time to play it. He did a long interview with Mark Levin on Fox News last night, about 40 minutes. And then here's a short one that he did with Mario Bartiromo on Fox Business the other day.
It's time for the hot topic of the hour. I sat down with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night at the Blair House in Washington to discuss the extraordinary month and a half the Israelis and the U.S. has had against Iran. I also talked about the markets in Israel and how they were so strong throughout the conflict. Watch.
It was extraordinary to me to watch the stock market in Israel trade at all-time highs.
It's like a vertical wall.
Even in the midst of all of this. Give us some perspective about Israel today and where things are going after the tragic events of October 7th, after all of the fighting and the conflicts. And then I want to ask you about whether or not you can get back to startup nation, entrepreneurship, innovation.
We never left it.
Aren't those people now in the reserve?
Oh, yeah, but the Army, well, first let's understand, there are two innovation nations in the world. One is called the United States of America, and the other is called Israel. These are engines of innovation, of creativity, of entrepreneurship that are enormous. Now, Israel wasn't always that way. I had to lead a free market revolution, first as a finance minister with 100 reforms, just to take us away from the semi-socialist economy that we had and unleash the genius of our people and the innovative spirit. And we did that. And, if you had visited Tel Aviv 20 years ago, 22 years ago, there was one high-rise, one skyscraper there. Today, there's a forest. And I remember when I took on the job of finance minister, my boy was a little young boy. He said, "Daddy, look at the skyline in Tel Aviv, and look at the skyline in New York. I mean, we're never going to be like that." And I said, "Well, relax, son. Your father is going to be the finance minister, and you'll see that will happen." And if you look at the skyline in Tel Aviv today, it's a remarkable change. And that's basically the unleashing of free market powers of capitalism, okay? So once we did that with 100 reforms, exactly that happened. And what happened is that we used the technological capability that is built in our army. The military produces technology. You just saw that. You saw the greatest technology. Intel, weaponry, precision, I don't want to even talk about it, okay? AI, you name it, all come to the fore and achieve this remarkable victory. That's Israeli technology. That technology that was embedded in our military, the minute we liberated the market forces, burst out into the startup nation. So the fact that you have reservists, yeah, we have reservists, but believe me, they're working in the army while they're there to make even greater inventions that nobody can imagine. Today we signed right here in the Blair House, an AI agreement between America and Israel, the two most innovative societies on the planet. And boy, is that going to be big. And AI has, incredible potential. We became one of the two preeminent cyber powers in the world, small Israel. It's gigantic in terms of brain power, in terms of initiative, and so on.
Where does that leave China?
Well, I think, where does it leave the free world? You want the free societies to have the most advanced, cutting-edge technology on Earth, and I think we do. And I think the reason the stock market is going up, you have to compare two stock markets. Look at the Iranian stock market and look at the Israeli stock market.
And the American stock market.
And the American stock market. And you know what? It's related. Those are, in Iran, it's below the floorboards. In Israel, it's vertical. In America, it's shooting up because of the things that people have confidence. They have confidence in the future. They have confidence in innovation. And you know that the products of the mind change. Well, the conceptual products are the value added there is so enormous. But we're also looking at other things. We're looking at oil and gas and the possibility of opening up energy markets, opening up communication markets, opening up trade routes in the Middle East, opening up the trade routes between Asia, India, and Europe, going through the Arabian Peninsula, right through through Israel. It changes the whole thing. This thing, the markets aren't stupid. They're pretty smart. Political markets don't adjust quite as quickly as the economic markets. The economic markets enjoy collective wisdom and rapid wisdom. Political markets take a little longer, but they adjust too. And I have great confidence in the future.
So let me just make a few comments on what he said. So in Bible prophecy, there is this prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Everybody talks about it all the time. Now, one, I don't think this is happening anytime soon. I actually think that Ezekiel 38, 39 is more towards the end of the 70th week, not at the beginning. And there's a lot of disagreement on this. So I want to make this statement. So I did a talk with Olivier Melnick. Olivier Melnick and I disagree on the timing of the rapture, but we're very good friends. He's been here to church to speak. I've been to his church to speak. And I think we really need to set aside some of these arguments on what happens in the future. Because one thing we know is that you really shouldn't have an argument about things that are facts, things that have actually happened in time and space. A lot of the things in eschatology have not yet happened. And so there is significant disagreement among Bible prophecy experts. I run into them all the time. I talk to them. I do interviews with them. And it's funny because nobody agrees on everything. Everybody has their own different view. And I think it's a little bit, I just don't like the division over things that are going to happen in the future. We can talk about the things that are going to happen. We can do righteous speculation about when they're going to happen and the order that they're going to happen in. But I have a problem where we get into this really big division about it. So that's my preliminary thing. So in Ezekiel chapter 38, 39, here's one area of dispute. It talks about from the far north. It talks about Gog, Magog. It talks about Meshach, Tubal, Togarmah. It talks about Persia. And we know, for example, that Iran is about 55% ethnic Persian. It has a lot of other minorities that people are, I think, trying to exploit in some cases, some people in the West, to try to divide Iran. It'd be much easier to deal with smaller powers than a big power. But be that as it may, it's clear that Persia is part of this coalition that comes against Israel in the last days. It's also clear that Turkey is part of this coalition, and I've got a fairly long video, if I have time to play it today, I'm going to play it, of a Turkish admiral that's sort of talking about the response to the Abraham Accords. And then it also, there's a lot of people think that Russia is involved. I'm open-minded on that. I'm not thoroughly convinced. But if Russia happens, then I'll say, yeah, I've been talking about that all along, because it is possible that it's Russia. And one of the interesting things is it says, I will put hooks in your jaw and drag you in. And then the question always becomes, what are the hooks in your jaws? And I've mentioned this a number of times before. I sort of picked up on this with an interview. I was doing an interview with Miri Eisen, and in preparation for that interview, I actually may not look like it, but I actually do prep work before I interview people. I was listening to some of her interviews, and she said that the only world leader that ever scared her physically when she was in his presence, she was a government spokesperson, was Vladimir Putin. She said, he physically scared me when I was he's the only one, scared me to be physically in his presence. And number two, she says, but a lot of people don't realize that a significant portion of Israel are ethnic Russians, Russian-speaking Jews that came in from the Soviet Union. So two things about that. One, and I've run into them. I mean, I remember trying to buy gas up in the Nahariya, and the guy was this kind of big burly Russian. He spoke kind of Hebrew and broken English with a Russian accent. You know, it was kind of strange. But the other thing too is that a tremendous amount of the technological brain power that's come into Israel over the years, the Prime Minister Netanyahu just talked about, are Russian-speaking Jews. And if you think now, so try to put this, and so this is, I'm a lawyer, so I try to connect dots. And one of the dots that I connect is that I see that the reason Putin went into Ukraine, one of his big stated reasons was to protect what? Ethnic Russians. Now we have brain power from Russia in Israel. Is he going to get it in his mind that he needs to protect ethnic Russians in Israel? And this is part of the reason. This is the hook in the jaw that drags him in. Now, I would say if you go to any Bible prophecy conference and you lined everybody up and ask them about John Haller's theory, they would say, that's crazy. Okay. You know, I love it eventually when people agree with me. So we'll just wait for that in the future, and I may not be alive to see it, so it's no big deal. But that's a possibility. And so you're seeing this alignment of the nations, but as I've shared many times, I was at a dinner with Chuck Missler and Bill Koenig in Arizona one night. I asked Chuck, do you get excited? And Chuck said, yeah, but I really watch Turkey. This is like 16, 17 years ago. And ever since then, I took Chuck's advice. I've watched Turkey. And this week we're seeing a lot of that with Turkey. So the question is, how is all of this going to work out? Now, as I've mentioned, there's been a big push. This is a billboard that was put up in Israel, Tel Aviv. In the upper right-hand corner, it says Coalition for Regional Security. And we talk about this. We know these Bible verses all the time. When they say peace and security, then sudden destruction comes. And what I'm trying to convey to you is watch when secular people who don't know Bible prophecy speak in the language of what Bible prophetic passages say. When they see peace and security. So now here's this new group in Israel. They put this stuff up back in January of this year, abrahamshield.org. And what they're trying to do is called the Coalition for Regional Security. So when you see people using the biblical terms that we talk about in Bible prophecy, pay attention to what they do, because I think it's very important. And so when you see Turkey being prominent, or Russia being prominent, or Persia/Iran being prominent, that's things you ought to pay attention to. That ought to be part of your grid, is look for people using Bible prophecy terms that don't have a clue about Bible prophecy. And so here you see this poster put up, and it talks about I can't remember what the Hebrew phrase there, the big bold phrase is, something about the Abraham covenant. Okay, thank you. Always glad to have foreign language. And but understand, it talks about we want to bring about a new or renew the Abraham covenant. That's biblical language that they're using. Now, some of these people are religious Jewish people that are behind this organization. I know some of them. But they're using those terms. And then there's a theory out there that I am increasingly subscribing to about that there's a Psalm 83 coalition that's going to come together. And Psalm 83 talks about they're going to come together and they're going to connive and conspire against Israel to wipe them out. But what's one of the ways that you connive and conspire? Well, you do it's like, so I went to Indiana State to get a master's degree. And Pam and I, we hated Terre Haute. I mean, we really did not, amen? She's back there shaking her head. We did not like Terre Haute. That was, if we didn't have each other, it would have been easily the most miserable year of my life. But the one redeeming quality was I had my wife with me, and Larry Bird was playing basketball for Indiana State. And so here's the point about Larry Bird is that it might be related to what happens with this Psalm 83 alliance against Israel. They look like they're making peace and they want to get along, but have you seen the head fakes that Larry Bird used to do? I mean, he would juke a little bit there with on the court, and the other guy would fall down, and then he'd just, boom, pop one in. And that's what it might be. It's like a Larry Bird head fake that they're doing by entering into this alliance. Oh, we want to make peace. And so there are 10 people groups that are identified in Psalm 83. And I would say when you look at this billboard, a lot of them are in the people groups of Psalm 83. And I showed this to a Bible prophecy guy, and he looked at it and he said, whoa, man, this looks like the Beast Empire forming. Now, I'm not going to tell you who it was. I was going to say you couldn't pay me enough to tell you who it was, but you might be able to do that. So you can give that a shot. But here you have King Abdullah II of Jordan. You have al-Shara al-Jilani of Syria. You have the head of Lebanon. You have Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, al-Sisi. Then you have Mohammed bin Salman. And I think that that's clearly one of the groups there. And then you have President Trump, and then you have Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then you have guys from the Gulf countries. And I think Morocco guy might be in there too. So you're seeing, in sort of broad terms that people talk about in eschatology, you're actually seeing these things on billboards in Tel Aviv, is the point that I'm trying to make. And when Prime Minister Netanyahu says, well, we've never seen things like this before, and I'm saying is, we've never seen things like this before. This has not happened. So listen to what he says and then say, well, is there anything else that we're seeing that we haven't seen before? And the answer is, there's plenty in this whole thing this week. So this was at the Abraham Shield. They took The Economist and they said, well, Israel alone, Israel is not alone. And they have this idea, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to take over Gaza. They're going to create Hamastan, they call it. Now, I don't like that terminology. I think they're crazy, and I think Prime Minister Netanyahu would say Hamas could never be in power again. And the question is, are they doing things to get Hamas out of power? And these ceasefires, well, I'm not in charge of anything, so I would not agree to these ceasefires. I would say, we're going to finish Hamas, then we'll talk. Finish them, wipe them out. And then I would say, and President Trump, I know you have a relationship with the Qataris, but I'm telling you, they're harboring the leadership of Hamas there. And, you know, we got to work something out. We've got to take these people out. Because the only way you can deal with them is if they're dead. They have to be taken out. And Israel knows this. Everybody in Israel knows this. And it's frustrating, I think, to a lot of people there. Why is this not being done? And now this Abraham Shield organization comes along, and their hearts, they want peace, they want security, they want safety. There we go. There's all those biblical Bible prophecy terms again, and that's all through their website and their documents and the things that they've done. And they want to say, well, Israel not alone. We're going to enter into peace with all these countries, and we're going to make peace, and everything's going to be great. And the Bible says when that happens, sudden destruction comes. Because it's not to say that people shouldn't try to make peace, but it's just that we know at some point you're at the time in history when these things are going to unfold completely. And I think we're getting increasingly closer to that time. So there are a lot of different places, a lot of people analyzing the Abraham Accords. If I remember this afternoon, I'll post a link to one of those. I thought it's pretty good analysis of it. And people have mixed feelings. They want peace, but they don't want to cause more problems by making the peace. And the problem with this, and I think if you talk to Dr. Kadar, Mordecai Kadar, and other Islamic experts, they will say no agreement with them means peace. It means we're going to make peace with you until we can beat you. And that's the problem with everything is, I forget who I read this week, very intelligent person. He said, every agreement with them will be a hudna. A hudna is an agreement that you enter into for a period of time when you're weak so you can get strong again and then take them over. That's Muslim doctrine 101. And sometimes, by the way, you will see people on the, I hate to use the term Palestinian, but the Palestinian side of this, and they will say, we want to make peace for 7 years. I mean, I've even actually seen them, they say, we want to make peace for 7 years or 10 years, but they're only doing it to delay what they really want to do. It's the Larry Bird head fake of geopolitical negotiations. Just always keep that in mind. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go to YouTube this afternoon, type in Larry Bird head fake, and you will be shocked at what you see. It's like, how does this, I think I could say this, how does this white guy from rural Indiana do this? And that in basketball, it was amazing. But so there's a lot of things that have happened there. So you see things like, so right now you're seeing a lot of, this is a a article that was written for a publication called The Insider. And what it says is that behind the scenes, we always think, oh, Russia and Iran are getting along. They have these agreements. They have defense agreements. They have cooperation agreements. And they do. But now what's coming out? Iran did not do very well in this 12-day war. Let's be honest. And Iran is upset with Russia because they felt Russia abandoned them, didn't send them the drones and things that they needed. So they're upset. And so here's what this article says: a dozen knives in the back of the Islamic Revolution. Secret FSB documents confirm Iran and Russia are waging a spy war against each other. So they don't trust each other. Why? Because they're not trustworthy. Neither side. It's, you remember the old, I was going to say I used to read this, but then that would unsanctify me. So I heard about this magazine when I was growing up called Mad Magazine. And there was a great series in there that I heard about. Somebody told me about called Spy versus Spy. Do you remember the Spy versus Spy? It was great. I'm sure you can find it. And by the way, in today's terms, this would be kind of mundane, not too controversial type stuff. We used to have these big controversies in the Haller household when I was growing up. Like, my dad was a pastor. We didn't go to movies. But the big debate in our house, I remember in the 1960s, was, would it be okay for the pastor of this church to go to The Sound of Music in the movie theater? And the vote was no, we did not go. So, and now I've got that song running, one of those songs running through my head right now, and it'll bug me all day. But anyway, so understand that Russia, the alliances that we see in Ezekiel 38 and 39, they're kind of tenuous. They're competitive. Russia and Iran don't get along. Iran and Turkey don't get along. They might unite together for a while against Israel to wipe out Israel. They want to get rid of Israel. So one of the people in that is, so this is a billboard in Tehran bearing the images of military leaders and nuclear scientists killed during the recent war with the words, "Israel will drown in the blood that it has shed," written out in Hebrew and Farsi. Other countries are involved in this. We talked about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has big plans. A lot of the Gulf countries have big plans. They are pushing artificial intelligence, technology, technocracy. They have 2030 vision statements. They have 2030 vision plans. The Saudis rolled theirs out in 2016. By the way, at a big conference with Mario Bartiromo was one of the MCs. And now here is this big building being built in Riyadh. The foundations are done. It's coming up. It's called the New Murabba. It could contain, it's 20 or 25 Empire State Buildings inside. It's 1,500 feet on each side. And the interior of this has this structure that is sort of like the artist conceptions of the Tower of Babel. And so when you see things like reconstructions of the Tower of Babel being used in this period of time, understand that the Tower of Babel thing will recapitulate. It'll happen again in the end times. So when you see secular countries or religious countries like Saudi Arabia, at least that claim to be religious, doing things like this, and this thing, if you look at these artist conceptions of the New Jerusalem, this is probably about as close a representation that you can get, except that this is a drawing, but it's an actual building being built in Riyadh, where for the foreseeable future, the World Economic Forum is going to hold its annual meeting, where they're going to talk about all this stuff about how they want to control us. And the UAE, they've developed a lot. They've got all these biggest building on the planet, tallest building on the planet. credible buildings, fake island or artificial islands. Excuse me, they're real. They're artificial islands built out in the Gulf, and you can see them from satellite. They're so big for people to live on. So understand, all of this stuff is coming together, and this is part of the Abraham Accords, and this is the enticement of the Abraham Accords, because when you talk to people in Israel, they'll talk about, when I was there 2 years ago, they were talking about, well, we're going to get, $50 billion or $100 billion of business. Now it's $1 trillion that they're going to get from these Gulf countries. So that has $1 trillion. That speaks a lot of people's language. Saudi Arabia, here was a big ceremony they just had because they've got U.S. missile systems, the THAAD missile system in Saudi Arabia they're doing. And it says here, His Excellency inspects the THAAD air defense system at the 2nd Air Defense Group and the Air Defense Forces Institute. But then there's this fly in the ointment. Saudi Arabia, Israel talks depend on ending Hamas rule on Gaza in favor of the Palestinian Authority. And that's a fool's errand for most people in Israel. There's no difference ideologically between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority has just been at it a little bit longer, and so they're a little bit more clever. But these guys are not to be trusted. And they're corrupt. They have problems. They do cooperate somewhat with Israel to protect their power base and their, sort of their corruption economy that they have. But, and here's what this one said, the source talking about this, stress that as long as Hamas is involved in managing the Gaza Strip, the job isn't done. Without removing Hamas, there will be no peace. That was from the Saudi side. This position outlined by the Saudi source is the first confirmation that the end of the war in Gaza alone is insufficient in Saudi eyes to restarting the normalization process with Israel. And that's what everybody's talking about. We got to normalize with Saudi. Got to normalize with Saudi Arabia. How do we do about it? And the Saudi official position is we want a two-state solution. I think that Saudi Arabia could normalize with Israel, but I don't know that they're going to give up on the two-state solution until the king dies. Now, it's very well could be. I could be wrong on that, but I haven't seen any indication that that's going to happen. But I think when the king passes away, I think some things will change politically for Mohammed bin Salman, assuming that he remains in power. So here's the Saudis, or not the Iranians. Ayatollah Khamenei personally commanded the war room. So there he is at his first public appearance a week ago. And a lot of he did not speak. A lot of people said his turban looked a little disheveled. I don't know. I don't look at him that closely. But they said he just didn't look right. There was something wrong about the way he was. But so what happened? The Iranians read that. They read all those people speculating about it. They pay attention to what people say. And so they come out now, they're rehabilitating the Ayatollah. He was really running everything behind the scenes. He was fully in charge of the 12-day war and led us to this great victory. What great victory? It's sort of like the football team. Our defense is killing them. We're allowing their offense to run up and down the field so much in the early part of the game that they're going to tire themselves out. Something like that. But so here's an interview. Now I'm going to just read this. This is of course in Farsi, but it's talking about, so can we do nuclear weapons? And he says, back in the day, I believed, and I still do, that we have always needed some sort of deterrence. We still do with regard to producing a nuclear bomb or weapons of mass destruction in general. I'm against that for ideological and religious reasons. I believe that many in the Islamic Republic share that. Perhaps the leader also believes this, and this is why he declared it to be prohibited. However, we need to pay attention to being on the threshold. I have always supported, and I still do, and will continue to support, meeting the threshold criteria. In other words, able to build a nuclear weapon. In other words, we need to be in a position that if we make the decision, we can respond to a nuclear attack in the shortest time possible. So what do you get from that? All of this stuff about, they're not going to back off of this. I don't see how they're going to back off of this until you have a regime change. And nobody wants regime change. That'll be kind of messy. We don't know how it'll look. Here he goes on to say, threshold status means that if I make the decision, I can turn my knife into a sword. In other words, if they attack me, I can respond in less than 48 hours. And the interviewer says this, tactical nuclear bombs are not considered to be weapons of mass destruction, right? The guy responds, he's a member of parliament, or an advisor to it in Iran. No, they are considered to be a subcategory. The interviewer, because they are meant for a specific target, member of parliament responds, it does not matter, it's a subcategory. Therefore, we can equip our missiles with tactical nuclear weapons. Now, because they're not weapons of mass destruction, they're only going to destroy a big part of a city or something like that. And then he said this is kind of interesting. I am definitely sure that Iran will not commit such an incident until the Day of Judgment. And that shows the ideological ideas that they have. So they think they're going to bring about the apocalypse. And so this is another person, a strategic advisor to the Speaker of Iran's parliament, Mohammad Baghi Ghalibaf, posted an image to his Instagram story on Saturday depicting 2 mushroom clouds and nuclear fallout across Israel. And it was there. I went and looked it up. I think it's been taken down now, but it was there. So now that, Iran's saying no red lines in the next, we're going to really come at you hard in the next round. So I was going to say, speaking of nuclear war, this is slides. Official squabble over the Epstein probe. That's speaking of nuclear war. This is, listen, I can see all the followers going down right now. My view is that people need to lower their expectations on this. These are very difficult cases to put together. Now you have one of the main participants in prison, not talking, and the other one is, by all estimates, dead. So usually dead people don't come into court and testify. And by the way, a lot of the young people that would have been involved in whatever Epstein was doing, they're probably in their early 30s now. So you have problems with statute of limitations, making the case, and you just can't dump all these videotapes out in the open, because the victims have privacy rights. There's ethics rules that govern Pam Bondi and that type of thing. So I'm not making excuses for or the decisions or anything like that, but the fact is, I don't know that anything's going to happen. So Epstein was a bad guy. That's it. So anyway, so back to this Middle East stuff where it's only countries fighting, not political parties infighting. The fault lines in the autocratic axis, and you see China, Russia, Iran, they're having some trouble getting along. And I think saw a good interview with Kyle Bass, who is I would consider him a bit of a China expert, saying that, a lot of what was done in Iran by the United States was to send a message to China, don't you dare mess around with Taiwan. And that would have a huge impact on us because of the chips that are made in Taiwan and nowhere else. So that's got to be protected regardless of what the guys down at Talking Point USA conference, it's not our war. We do have an interest in it. You don't understand. You don't want China controlling all of that. There's a reason for that, but neither here nor there. Now, about 2 weeks ago, in the Daily Sabah in Turkey, it's one of Erdogan's mouthpiece newspapers, they had this very interesting article. And again, the point is, when you see non-Christian, non-Bible prophecy people talking about talking about things in prophetic terms, pay attention to what they're doing, because I think it's significant. And I've been at this a long time. I've not seen this level of this happening before. This is different. you can imagine what discussions might have been at the time before the birth of Jesus. They might have been discussing in homes in Israel, is Moshiach coming? Why is it different now that Moshiach would come? Well, because the timing was right. It was in the fullness of time and all that, and it might be in the fullness of time, appears to be in the fullness of time again. So prophecy in Palestine, the Dajjalanian architecture of modern occupation. Now, I'm not going to go into this. You can read it, but just listen to the first paragraph. The modern occupation of Palestine is often analyzed through legal instruments, human rights frameworks, and power politics. Yet scholars such as Rashid Khalidi, that's the guy that we're trying to boot out of the United States, and hopefully he will be joined by the guy who's running for the mayor of New York, who my understanding is being funded to the tune of about $24 million by the son of George Soros and his organization, and the son of George Soros is currently engaged to Huma Abedin, who I think she's still married to Anthony Weiner, the congressman that she left. They had a child together. And her parents published one of the major Muslim Brotherhood newspapers in the world out of Saudi Arabia. If you've ever been in New York when there's a garbage strike, the garbage collectors go on strike, it stinks. Okay? Even on garbage day, it stinks. And that whole thing stinks to high heaven. So anyway, yet scholars such as Rashid Khalidi and international legal bodies, including the United Nations Human Rights Council, highlight that the ideological foundation underpinning Israel's expansion often transcends secular rationale. The idea of Greater Israel or Eretz Israel stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates is not simply a geopolitical ambition. It is a theological blueprint drawn from biblical scripture and messianic expectation, and increasingly invoked by Israel's leaders to justify actions that defy international norms. Yeah, like Muslims have never invaded another country. So they talk about violence as divine duty, and it goes on. And so this is a big deal within the Islamic world that Israel talks about, we're going to expand Israel at some point. And there's a reason for that. If Israel expands its area of control, might not have problems with people in these areas. And Judea Samaria is a very big problem because it goes back to ideology. I just was reading a very good history today of Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat was, by most estimates, the nephew of the Hajaman al-Husseini, who worked with Hitler to wipe out the Jews in World War II. He was his nephew, or he was Yasser Arafat's uncle and mentor. And I know I've read that they also mentored another guy over in Iraq whose uncle was in leadership, and that guy's name was Saddam Hussein. Very closely connected. But Yasser Arafat, by the way, he wasn't born in Israel. He wasn't born in what's called Palestine. He was born in Egypt. And he immigrated, just like there are many, I've seen videos of Palestinian guys. Yeah, we all came from some Arab country like Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Egypt or someplace else. So this is a big deal, though, to the Islamic world that Israel looks like it's wanting to expand. And so there was an article in June in Le Monde magazine, or a newspaper, and it talked about the challenges of a Pax Hebraica in the Middle East. And this is a term that's being bandied about the Muslim Islamic world in the Middle East that is, the translation, Israel's getting too big for its britches. Look at what the article says. The bombing of Iran's nuclear sites by the U.S. marks the triumph of Israel, which in just a few months has become the sheriff of the Middle East, writes Le Monde columnist Gilles Paris. It says, the interesting article. On February 2nd of this year, Benjamin Netanyahu prepared to fly to Washington for a first meeting with Donald Trump since the latter's return to the Oval Office. On the tarmac at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport, the Israeli Prime Minister outlined his vision. The decisions we made in the war have already changed the face of the Middle East. Our decisions and the courage of our soldiers have redrawn the map, but I believe that working closely with President Trump, we can redraw it even further and for the better. Less than 6 months later, the bombing of Iran's main nuclear sites by the most powerful army in the world during the night of Saturday, June 21st to Sunday, June 22nd, confirmed the triumph of Israel, which in only a few months has become the sheriff of the Middle East. Of course, the U.S. has always voiced unambiguous opposition to the Iranian regime and especially to its nuclear program. Yet the Israeli Prime Minister managed to enlist at a moment of his choosing a U.S. president who, upon taking office on January 20th, insisted that his success would be measured by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, by the wars we never get into. And so this guy's got a Middle Eastern bent in his writing. He's French, okay? Apologies to my French friends, but he's French. And he sees this is the safe political way to take. You know, we're not going to support Israel in any way. We're going to support their enemies. And things changed. He's right, though. In 6 months, things changed. Took out Hania, took out the leadership of Hamas. They took out the leadership of Hamas in Gaza. They took out Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. They dismantled Hezbollah. They have dismantled what was left of the Syrian military. And now the guy in Syria wants to make peace or normalize with Israel, although that's kind of a weird negotiation that's going on right there. But it changed. Things dramatically changed. I was doing interviews with people. They were concerned Israel was going to have 25,000 dead people a week if Hezbollah got involved. Hezbollah got involved, and unfortunately there have been, I don't know, a few dozen people killed in Israel from Hezbollah, but not 25,000 a week for weeks on end that they were talking about. The soldiers, I mean, they've lost a lot of soldiers. Every one is a major tragedy in my estimation, but compared to what the estimates were, it's almost miraculous in many respects. And there were a lot killed in the last couple of weeks. So the other day I came across this YouTube video. I'm going to play a little bit of it. I'm going to jump around a little bit. This is a retired Turkish admiral. This is dubbed by AI into English, which is kind of, this AI stuff is, I don't usually use it, but I'm going to play a clip of President Erdogan speaking yesterday at a big party in Turkey. After this, it was all in Turkish. I could not find a translation. I uploaded it to a free site. It gave me the Turkish words in a transcript. I clicked and immediately had it in English. One more click and I had it with all the timestamps to put it into a video. Now, the whole process took about 6 minutes. It was a 55-minute speech. Now, the problem with this is, there's a big problem now with deepfakes. Caroline Glick, she posted on her Facebook page a video that somebody had put up about her saying something. She said, I never said this. And this is a problem for those of us who have. So listen, if it's not on my YouTube channel or YouTube channel of a friend, don't believe it. Because this is a problem we're all going to have to deal with as we go forward. So here's this guy dubbed into English by AI, speaking about the situation in the Middle East right now. Now, this is 18 minutes long, but I'm not going to play all of it, but here we go.
There's a very interesting situation. The interesting thing is this. After all these attacks, Iran has now come out and declared that its nuclear capacity remains intact. This is very important, extremely important. 3, agreement and fragmentation. All 3. Fragmentation. France has a ship over there. France also has a destroyer and an intelligence ship. From Japan, another aircraft carrier. They're sending a task group.
Countries coming into the Middle East to help Israel.
We will redesign the Middle East and anyone who dares raise their head or voice will be crushed. Azerbaijan is our brother state. Therefore, every problem of Azerbaijan is also our problem.
Hello everyone from the GZT News Center. We are once again at the map with Admiral Cihat Yaycı. Welcome, Admiral.
Thank you, Mr. Dokan.
We had a broadcast with you on the first day of the Israel-Iran war. Later, during the so-called 12-day war that followed, the period referred to by Trump, we held several broadcasts. According to the discourse, the war has ended, but when we look at the seas, at the region, we see that especially the U.S. military presence at sea still continues. What does this indicate? Why haven't they withdrawn? Will they continue? How should we interpret this?
Now, here's the thing. There's a very strong impression that this is a pause, a break between the first and the second round. In other words, everyone has taken some lessons, and Israel does not actually have the armed forces to carry out a long-term war. That is, strike, hit hard, and collapse the opponent with major blows. Now they try to strike with major blows, with the help of the United States and the United Kingdom. However, Iran has not yet collapsed to the level they intended. And the statements being made suggest something quite interesting, as if Iran is taunting them, saying, "You couldn't do anything to us." With a childish tone, "You couldn't do anything to us. Our nuclear capacity is intact. We moved the uranium, we moved the plutonium, and so on." In other words, they are sending the message, we are producing nuclear weapons. But in some official statements, they also say, no, we have nothing to do with nuclear weapons. So, on the one hand, you say you are not producing nuclear weapons, and on the other hand, you say your nuclear capacity remains intact, and that you already moved the enriched uranium and plutonium elsewhere. Now, Iran has uranium enriched up to 60%. It is said to be around 408 kilograms. This makes 5 to 7 nuclear warheads enriched to 60%. Each warhead is said to have the power of Hiroshima, as powerful as the one dropped on Hiroshima. If this amount is enriched to 90%, then that would make 12 to 15 nuclear warheads. Now, here's the question I want to raise. Iran says that it is a party to the NPT, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It tells the International Atomic Energy Agency to come and inspect. It says it already has reports. It says it has nuclear facilities for peace. Call was wrong in 1916. They say it was incomplete. It was insufficient.
What kind of addition are they proposing?
They're saying, from now on, we will establish Sykes-Picot 2.0. Sykes-Picot will happen in 2025, and they're saying it will be Pax Israelica. They say we will establish a belt of friendly states around Israel. This means a belt of regimes that are friendly, governable, docile, and manageable by us. Do you know who's included in this? Lebanon? Syria. We mentioned this before, didn't we? Now, Israel made a statement. We want to establish good relations with Syria, right? And they made contact. They even advertised their goal of signing Abraham Accords on billboards in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, remember? Assad was included in this, so was Sisi. Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Armenia, and the Greek Cypriot administration of southern Cyprus and Greece.
We're talking about quite a broad line here.
They even included Iran. Iran is in there too. After regime change, it will be governed by us, what they call Pax Israelica.
So what you refer to as the second round of the Iran-Israel war might
Of course, this is what they want to shape. When the Gaza events began on October 7th, 2023, didn't Netanyahu and Biden say the same thing? Nothing in the Middle East will ever be the same. We will redraw the borders in the Middle East. There will be regime change in Iran, they said. Who repeated the same thing? Trump. So now, Pax, no one should ever forget this, Israelica. That is the goal. Just like there used to be Pax Romana, the peace zone under control of the Roman Empire. This is the belt aligned with me. Pax Israelica. That is the new concept now.
So in this issue, you're calling the second round. Iran is part of the equation, but as you said, the war might not be over yet.
Okay, so there's a lot to say about that, and in some respects, I have no doubt that this guy is anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic to the core, but this is the way the Turks view this. This is what's important. Who's involved in Ezekiel 38 and 39? Turkey. Who have I been talking about ad nauseum almost every week? Turkey. Watch Turkey. Turkey is very important in this. And so he calls it, and there are people in the Bible prophecy community who talk about the Greater Israel Project. And I'm telling you, the Turks pick up on that and they say, look, see, they want to control everything, those Jews. Now, they don't. He made a very interesting comment at the beginning. He says they don't have the land forces, the armed forces to do that. They're having trouble with Gaza, let's be honest. Okay, it's hard, it's small. But to control all of the Middle East, they have to do it by what? Alliances and agreements. The Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements that you see them bringing about all the time. So what the guy says is accurate. He then translates that into they want to remake the Pax Romana of the Mediterranean of the turn of the millennium, from BC to AD, and call it the Pax Israelica. And then he goes on and he has all these drawings and he says, there's ships from France and Britain and the United States. There are 66 ships, major ships in the area. Those aren't Israeli ships, folks. Israel doesn't have a navy of 66 ships. And I think that's why he put the Ika on Pax Israelica is kind of America type thing. Now, listen, this is his view. I'm not endorsing it or anything like that. I'm just telling you, this is the way Erdogan thinks. How many times do I have to show you this poster that Erdogan's son used at a rally on January 1st this year in Istanbul? Up at the top, Dun Hagia Sophia, First Hagia Sophia, the largest church ever built in Christianity, turned into a mosque 5 years ago by Erdogan. Big ceremony, by the way. First, we get the Christians. Next, Umayyad, Damascus. What happened in December? Damascus fell to an Islamic group funded, directed, put together by Turkey. So now we've got the Umayyads. We've got the Persian version of the big Islamic caliphate. We've taken care of that. And finally, it will be Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa, tomorrow Al-Aqsa, Jerusalem and the Jews. This is his plan. This is what he's laid out. And I've talked about it ad nauseum. And you remember when we moved the embassy to Jerusalem back in 2017 under the first Trump administration, Erdogan went ballistic, had a big meeting, organization of Islamic countries, brought them all to Istanbul. And what did he do? Had one of his newspapers, Yeni Sefek, put this up. And all of us guys in Bible Prophecy, we all have our Ezekiel 38, 39 maps. Use Erdogan's. That's it right there. What if all the Islamic countries came against Israel? Well, it seems like I think that's prophesied. And I'm just saying is the people involved in this that oppose Israel are speaking in biblical prophetic terms. So pay attention to what they're saying, I think. And so here is a speech Erdogan gave yesterday in Israel, and it talks about this guy says, his analysis, in a speech today, Turkish President Erdogan set his sights on conquering a vast territory stretching from the China Sea to the Adriatic, envisioning a Turkish, Arab, and Kurdish alliance to achieve it a neo-Ottoman dream reloading. Now, let me tell you something. He's right until he says neo-Ottoman. Erdogan's dream is not neo-Ottoman, the reestablishment of an Ottoman Empire. Why? Because the Ottoman Empire wasn't a big enough caliphate for him. He wants a Eurasian caliphate in Africa, throw Africa in for good measure. On the road to a bigger one, that's what he thinks about. And he's 2 days younger than I am. I don't think he'll get it done in his lifetime, but he's going to try it. They have the largest army in NATO outside of the United States. Europe cannot match them in terms of personnel. So he has a caliphate dream. Some people will diminish that a little bit, try to cut it down to size so they can manage it intellectually. A neo-Ottoman, it's not. So here's a speech. This is the one I got together with the transcript. And so what happened yesterday was there was this big ceremony in Turkey, and you see the flames. And what happened was Turkey has had this battle with elements of the Kurdish people, the PKK and others, calling them terrorists and everything. And when Syria with al-Jilani took over Syria with Turkey's help, the Kurds that were involved in this said, we're done. This is huge. This is like an 8.0 earthquake in Middle East geopolitics. Yesterday, they brought their weapons and burned them. Now that has, I mean, you know, that's some of the language that's used in Ezekiel 38 and 39. The weapons will be burned for 7 years. I'm not saying that this is that, but I'm just saying is, watch the biblical terminology and everything being used and say, are we getting pretty close to this? And so there were things like these headlines in Sabah and Hurriyet, which I think means liberty. They're saying goodbye to pain, because the pain of the division in Turkish society is over. It's gone. The terrorists that opposed our great country have surrendered. Another headline here, I think on the only Erdogan could solve this problem. On the right, the paper Liberty, the announcement of the new era. The 47-year scourge of terrorism has, I think it was 41-year, scourge of terrorism entered its end. Today, the dawn of a great and powerful Turkey is breaking. The terror-free Turkey project is not the result of negotiation, bargaining, or give-and-take process. Great victory for Erdogan. This is what they're saying. And he says he's not running, but then he has these big political rallies. So here's this thing yesterday. And he goes on and he talks about...
Talas Savaşı'nda Türkler kitleler halinde İslam ile
So in 751 we became acquainted with Islam, and this was a great beginning of the Turkish people. And then he goes on to talk about how over time the Turkish people have united with others, the Kurds, who are the biblical Medes, I think the biblical Medes that helped defeat Babylon in the time of Daniel. After Mecca, Medina, he takes all these names. We're coming together. We're uniting. And we're going to unite with the Arabs. So when you see Sheba Dedan in Ezekiel 38:39 saying, what are you guys doing? And now a lot of people say, oh, they don't want to be involved. No, I think it's a Larry Bird head fake on their part. They're saying, well, why are you guys doing this? We're coming to help you. You know, that's how I think this is going to go down. And so they talk about Kurdish and Arab brothers. We're going to get together. He goes on to say, They are the common wars and common victories of many more Muslim peoples. Baghdad of the 1001 Night Tales is Turkish, Kurdish, and the Arabs built it. You see what he's doing? Jerusalem was conquered by the Turks, Kurds, and Muslims under the command of Saladin Ayyubi. The Arabs conquered. Damascus is our common city. That city too. Mosul, Kirkuk, Erbil, Aleppo, Hatay, Istanbul. Ankara is our partner city. There's a 900-room palace that he built in Ankara. When we, the Turks, Kurds, and Arabs, make an alliance, the wind was the Adriatic cool breeze from the China Sea. And by the way, everybody sitting there in that audience knows what he's referring to and how expansive this is. Remember, the rearing of our horses spread peace throughout the region. The clang of swords brought peace to this region. We unsheathed our swords when necessary and fought shoulder to shoulder. When necessary, we divided a slice of bread into three with our daggers. We sheathed our swords and daggers when necessary. We took out our pens to the earth, to the sky, to each other's hearts. And then there's an Islamic phrase there. Open the pages of history and look. When we make an alliance, our horses, our swords, our shields, our cries, no one could stand before our takbirs. When we make an alliance, we will be in a position to gain the same level of wealth as we do with our civilization, our art. No one could compete. If Turks, Kurds, Arabs are together, if they are together, Muslims, by the way, then there are Turks, Kurds, Arabs. When they are separated, divided, and distant, there is defeat. There is sadness. The Mongol armies ruthlessly destroyed the Islamic lands because the Turks, Kurds, and Arabs were separated. Crusaders attacked Islamic lands. Not as much as the Islamic attacked Crusader lands, because the Turks, Kurds, and Arabs were separated from each other. We lost World War I. Borders were drawn between us. Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1916, what that admiral was talking about. We lost Jerusalem because there was a division. When did we break up? We lost. We were defeated. When did we make an alliance? Then we drew the direction of history. Today in Gaza, Palestine, the most brutal, most savage, most barbaric genocide is being carried out. And he goes on and on. There's his wife. This is a very big speech. You can find it online. Just do Erdogan and upload date, and you'll be able to find it down the list. No one has the power to divide Turkey. What I'm saying is that, in summary, I would say, watch Turkey. All of this is biblical language. All of this is in prophetic terms, and he's telling you exactly what he wants to do. Now, how soon this happens, I don't know. What I'm just saying is the momentum is not changing till Jesus returns. That's the point of a lot of this. The momentum of things that you see in the world today is not changing until Jesus returns. I just have a couple more things. I'll go about 4 or 5 more minutes. So, but I don't have a couple more things. I will do a couple more things. So here we are, my chess pieces: Qatar, Syria, Turkey. Qatar is quietly opening a new front against Israel in Syria. And they are doing it under the guise of a popular resistance. Here's what you need to know. And the guy goes through this thread. But what did we do this week? Executive order issued June 30th, I think, by President Trump. We're removing sanctions from the Syrian regime. The guy who just not too long ago was part of al-Nusra, part of the Islamic Alliance. It's crazy. And by the way, this is going on in Syria. There are coast fires along the coast in the Latakia province. What's that about? That's the homeland of Assad. They hate Assad, and things are being burned there on purpose, and people are dying. In Israel, in the UK, anti-Semitism, this is front page of the Telegraph this morning, anti-Semitism rife among the middle class. Jewish people in Britain left with nowhere to turn. The review, co-authored by Lord Mann, the government's anti-Semitism advisor, and Dame Penny Mordaunt, the former defense secretary, warned that the Jewish people in the UK were suffering increasing prejudice in our professions, cultural life, and public services, and felt they were tolerated rather than being respected. And it goes into medicine. They're concerned they're not getting medical care. They're having education issues. And the conclusion of these, in fact, I think what this one article says, they said, we were stunned into silence by the evidence of UK anti-Semitism. By the way, these are sort of left-wing people. These are not evangelical Christian pro-Zionist type people. They're just like reporting on what they're actually seeing. They have a group in the UK called Palestine Action. They're just causing all sorts of damage and problems. They did arrest a bunch of them yesterday. But it happens here in America. TPUSA, Charlie Kirk's organization, has a big meeting this week. And I know a lot of people, I don't know Charlie Kirk. I know a lot of people who know him, they like him. Who does he invite? Tucker Carlson to speak. This guy, I think he put a tweet up, I think that summarizes it quite well. He starts off, Tucker Carlson is a fraud. I am shocked but listen, watch right-wing media. It's okay to hate Jews. It's okay to say the Jews caused all the wars and they're dragging us in and we're going to start World War III because of them. That's what they said would happen if Trump bombed a nuclear facility in Iran. World War III, thousands of American soldiers would die. To date, how many? And I had to do some maintenance on the planes when they got back after flying 37 hours. But I'm just telling you you're going to see increasing rhetoric. Here's a guy who evaluated what Tucker Carlson said at TPUSA, and he has a clip of him. Here we go.
Tucker Carlson is a fraud who sells out to the highest bidder. He recently stood on stage at Turning Point USA, a room full of young people who love America, love Israel, love the West, and he spit in all of their faces. Let's roll the clip.
For the common sense, when I say that no man can serve two masters, it's not possible. I only have one wife for that reason. You say to your wife, I'm going to take another wife, but I'm going to love you just as much. Nothing's going to change. My wife's going to look at me like, no, it's one wife. One wife.
Leaving.
Because you can only really pledge your loyalty to one person or one country. That's just a fact. And there's also a sense, and this is relevant to me, and I know you're speaking about Israel, but it's not just Israel, to be honest. I think it's a huge problem. I think anybody, by the way, who serves in a foreign military should lose his citizenship immediately. There are a lot of Americans who've served in the IDF, they should lose their citizenship. There's a lot of Americans who've served in Ukraine, and they should lose their citizenship. You can't fight for another country and remain an American, period.
Obviously? Let me tell you what's obvious. This man, Tucker, he sat down with the president of Iran, a dictator who funds terrorism and plots to kill Americans. He kissed the ring of Vladimir Putin while Russian troops slaughtered innocent people in Ukraine. And then he flew to Qatar, collected millions of dollars, and came back preaching their talking points as like they paid him. And now he wants to tell American Jews who risked their lives fighting terror in Israel that they're the ones who should lose their citizenship? This guy has no spine, he has no principle, and he has no business talking about loyalty. Here's the truth. When an American joins the IDF, they're not turning their back on America. They're standing shoulder to shoulder with our only true ally in the Middle East. And let's not forget, the only place in the Middle East where the American flag is not torched in the streets is in Israel. And you call that betrayal?
Being cowed into being like, oh, that's hate speech. No, it's not. You don't hear hate in my voice because there isn't any. It's just an obvious recognition of the truth.
Oh, it's not hate? Then why does it sound like the filth that we heard for generations? They serve two masters, they're not loyal, they control things, they don't belong. That's not the truth, Tucker. That's old school Jew baiting, and you know it. And you also know that your new bosses wouldn't mind hearing it. So you keep talking like your colleagues at Al Jazeera, because you have the same boss.
So I agree with that. So what Tucker Carlson did was he was engaged in a massive form of gaslighting everybody at TPUSA. Like, that's the problem. When he himself is the one who's doing this and spewing all of these lies and platforming all of these Islamic liars. Well, what's wrong with them? I don't know what's wrong with, and he gets this, gets that little girl, 13-year-old, well, it's just outrageous. I mean, And Tucker isn't speaking truth. He's laundering hate. I'm shocked. I am shocked that he spoke there. I'm all for free speech, okay? But the purpose of the meeting was to educate people. Now, if somebody got up after Tucker and said, don't pay attention to a thing that the guy said because it was all a bunch of propaganda, that would be great. But that didn't happen. So somebody needs to be held accountable for what happened in Tampa yesterday. That's my opinion. So I'll finish with this. This lady, Francesca Albanese, is the UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur. I don't know, what's rapporteur mean? Liar? Maybe it's a fancy word for liar. For illegitimate and hateful, shameful efforts to prompt the International Criminal Court action against U.S. and Israeli officials, companies, and executives. She's come out, I said this last week, she's coming out, she's got these big things that she's coming out with this, we got to sanction all these people. So Marco Rubio, like the guy, don't think he's perfect, but he said, we're sanctioning her. We're putting sanctions on her. She can't come to the United States. Hateful person. And anyway, by the way, she's been asked about the allegations of rape that happened on October 7th. And you know what she said? Well, we've had trouble getting with some of the victims. She did say this. We don't know that they're true. And Israel does it the same thing. There was a report that came out called the Dinah Project. This is a headline in Wednesday's Jerusalem Post. Hamas' use of sexual violence was a systematic weapon of war. It's called the Dinah Project. You can download it. It's called A Quest for Justice, October 7th and beyond. And they will tell you one of the reasons why the rape victims from October 7th didn't get a lot of traction with what happened to them was very simple. They were dead. So Francisco Albanese is a complete Jew-hating, anti-Semitic lunatic. Those are the good things I can think to say about her. That won't get me banned from speaking here ever again. This is a big deal that we see. And then final thing. So, talked about the red heifer. I was in Rockwall, Texas. They had red heifers that were shipped from there to to Israel. I don't know if they've all been disqualified. One was disqualified. They found a couple black hairs. And so they had up at Shiloh, where the tabernacle stood for 369 years. Remember Samuel hearing the call of God in the middle of the night? That happened at Shiloh, up in Samaria. They took this red heifer and they burned it. Now, that's not the red heifer burning that's necessary to build the next temple, but it's practice, okay? And this is what they will do. They will burn the red heifer and then collect the ashes and use those ashes to purify people that might be involved in temple service. So people will say, oh, this is no big deal. This is nothing. They don't do this all the time. This has not happened for almost 2,000 years. Probably longer than that, actually. So, and this red heifer might have been raised in Israel. I don't know. Some came from Texas. We're kind of joking at the prophecy conference we did down there a couple years ago, like, is there a red heifer barbecue? You know, how do you like your red heifer? Rare, medium, well done. But this is happening. And again, my caution is you're entitled, till things actually happen, you're entitled to your view of the end times, in my estimation. I will argue with you. We will argue about it. We will separate friends. But at some point when things actually happen that are fulfillment of prophecy, maybe then people have to say, okay, I need to adjust my timeline because this is that which was prophesied. And so that's what I'm just saying is be prepared to do that. All of us, you know, and we have a tendency, we get a view, we love our view, it makes us very comfortable, and then we interpret everything that happens to support our view. That's, we had that trouble I had that trouble in law practice. You got a case, you worked on it, you found facts, and amazing, every document I see supports our case. Can you believe it? And then a smart, older lawyer comes along and says, no, that's not true. You need to think this through a little bit. And I think that's where we are kind of in our Bible prophecy community. We need to be a little bit careful about these things. But I'm telling you this is significant. Now, I don't know that they need the ashes for the building of the temple or anything like that, okay? There's a lot of back and forth in the Jewish community, among the rabbis, arguing about that, if you can believe it. But I'm just saying this is something that's significant. But the red heifer, perfect picture of Christ, the perfect sacrifice of Jesus. That's, go read Numbers chapter 19 and get an idea of what it really means. And I have a bunch of AI stuff, and I'm going to not use it today because we're over time as usual. Okay, so let's pray. Let's pray. Lord, we just bring to you ourselves, Lord. We just pray that you'll give us wisdom and insight and understanding of the things that are happening. Pray you'll help us to speak the truth in love, but also act in love towards others around us that may have slightly differing views. We just pray, Lord, that you'll help us to be filled with your Holy Spirit so we have wisdom and insight into the things that are happening so we can be able to be the wise and instruct many about the things that are going on. We pray that you'll bless us, give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us. In Jesus' name, amen.